If you played any of the OG Call of Duty games, then I'm sure you remember it as the golden age of Call of Duty. Many people will say this for a few reasons. One of those major reasons is the fact that the older Call of Duty games didn't have skill-based matchmaking, or at least to the extent that it is at now. Back then, connection ruled king. What that means is that when you started matchmaking, the game would try to connect you to a lobby with the best possible connection. In other words, the game would try to connect you to a lobby with the best ping. As a result, you would get into a lobby with a variety of people of all different skill levels. This, in my opinion, and many other people's opinions, was the best matchmaking system we've ever had. The reason being is because you weren't put up against sweats every single game. Instead, you had some games which were really hard and other games that were really easy. It was all based on the people that got put into the lobby at a random, not by who the game thinks you should be playing against based on an in-depth system. If you didn't play Call of Duty during the time when it was connection based, then I'll break down how it was. Pretty much you'd connect to a lobby with people relatively local to you to be able to have the best connection possible. Whoever in the lobby had the best ping would be the host of the lobby, and therefore the lobby would run off of that person. It was a simple system that was extremely effective and allowed for you to play with everyone of all skill levels. That meant in some games you would have some absolute bots for enemies because they would be new to the game or just weren't that good at it. While other games you'd get some sweaty tryhards that play the game 24/7 who would stomp on you. It just all depended on the people who you were connecting into a lobby with. Most games I'd say were a pretty mixed bag of people of all skill levels. So everyone was able to have fun and didn't have to sweat every single game, only some games. This system was the best as you could play the game more casually, seeing as you didn't have to try your hardest every single match. The only people that didn't really benefit from this system were brand new players to the game and people who maybe had disabilities who wanted to play the game. Those people weren't able to compete against other players, especially really good players who were considered veterans of the game. For those people that are brand new to the game or have any sort of disabilities and want to play the game, I think the skill-based matchmaking system works for them, and that's honestly great that they have it to help them out. I think those people need some sort of system in place to help them learn the game in a more protected environment, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with being in the bottom percentage of players, as it's not your fault for being there. As I said, maybe it's just because you're brand new to the game, or you're playing with some sort of disability, so it's best you're not going up against veterans of the game or even pros who are crazy good at the game. Speaking of the veterans and pros of the game that do enjoy sweating and playing within a really competitive environment, that's okay. I can understand that love for competition, and I can see why you want to be trying your absolute hardest every game. However, I don't think that should be within the casual game modes of Call of Duty. You should be playing like that in your own environment where you could go up against other players with a similar mindset. That place would be ranked. Within ranked is the other place where skill-based matchmaking is definitely needed. This is where the top 10 to 20% of players should be playing. This is a place where you most definitely need a system in place to make the experience as fair as possible. Ranked is the place where all the sweats should be playing, as they could be going up against people of their skill level at all times and be challenged against people who also want to win the game. Skill-based matchmaking works well here and is something that players will actually appreciate. However, for the rest of the people who aren't in the bottom 10 to 20% of players, or the top 10 to 20% of players, skill-based matchmaking is not needed. For the average players that just want a casual gaming experience, skill-based matchmaking is just ruining the game for them. All skill-based matchmaking does for the people that don't actually need it is it forces them into lobbies in which they have to try their absolute hardest and sweat their ass off just to be able to do good because they're constantly going up against people of their quote-unquote skill level. This destroys the casual aspect of the game that the connection-based matchmaking system offered, because now if, for example, you want to play a match of Call of Duty within any newer Call of Duty games and you're considered a good player, then you'll get paired up against all other good players. Now, some people might be thinking this is a good thing because it promotes a more fair experience, but that's not what most people want. What most people want is a casual experience because Call of Duty is supposed to be a casual first-person shooter game. That's what it was made to be. You're supposed to be able to get on the game and play it without having to try your absolute hardest to every single match. You're supposed to be able to have fun and use guns you want to use instead of using what the meta guns are. Unfortunately, that's what you're forced to do though. Use what's considered to be the meta options just so you can compete against the other players because they're probably doing the same thing, which just leads to you being able to use a small percentage of the guns within the game. Again, this is something that would be fine within a ranked game mode, as everyone is going to be using the best of the best stuff to get the best advantage possible, but within what's supposed to be the casual game modes, that just doesn't make any sense. You should be able to use whatever you want, no matter if it's a good gun or not. So long as it's something that you enjoy using, then you should be able to use it and not get punished for it. But of course, skill-based matchmaking makes that impossible because you'll just get stomped on for using a bad gun. The sad part is they continue to keep it in the game year after year, even though the majority of the community always vocalizes how much they hate it and don't want it in the game. At this point, it just seems like a losing battle because the developers won't even mention skill-based matchmaking. It's like they're being forced to stay quiet about it, even after years and years of people complaining about it. They just continue to stay silent and keep it in the game for everyone and not just for the people that need it. This will ultimately lead to the death of Call of Duty, in my opinion. If they keep adding skill-based matchmaking into the game for the people that don't need it, then it will cause people to start to move to other games that have a more casual experience and have an actual connection-based matchmaking system. Currently, the only other game on the market that offers this experience that's at least a bigger title game is Battlefield. Unfortunately, Battlefield isn't in the best spot right now, as their last big title game, that being Battlefield 2042, was an absolute disaster. It launched as a completely unfinished game that was an absolute wreck. It had major bugs and performance issues. Also, there was a huge lack of content. Now, given nowadays Battlefield 2042 is actually good in my opinion. They completely fixed the game from the ground up and added so much more content to the game. However, just because of the really bad launch it had, it caused most people to just abandon the game and move on from it. Which means Battlefield isn't really a threat to Call of Duty, at least right now, but that could change in the future if the next game Battlefield releases is really good. People could see that Battlefield offers a much more casual experience and can be played without having to try your absolute hardest. Let's say you've already tried Battlefield though, and it's not really your cup of tea, seeing as how while it's similar to Call of Duty, it still has major differences that set it apart. For comparison, Battlefield is a huge open sandbox first-person shooter game that has really big maps with lots of different styles of combat. But yet Call of Duty is a small arcade first-person shooter game with much smaller maps and a very limited style of combat. A lot of people play Call of Duty for this very reason. They like the more small arcade style of a first-person shooter game compared to the big sandbox style of a first-person shooter game. That's why Call of Duty has stayed relevant for so long and has kept such a loyal fan base. It's simply because there's no other casual first-person shooter game that's also a small arcade style of game on the market, or at least not yet. Over the years, there's been many huge first-person shooter games that have tried to dethrone Call of Duty from its spot. Pretty much all of them have failed as they never felt exactly like Call of Duty, so they either gave up on their game or cut their losses and tried to do their own thing instead of trying to be like Call of Duty. A few examples would be games like Titanfall, Halo, and even Destiny, or at least Destiny's PvP side of things. Games like this have tried, but unfortunately failed to ever keep the fan base and relevance that the Call of Duty games have. So what game can you even play that's on the market currently that's similar to Call of Duty, yet doesn't have skill-based matchmaking in the areas it doesn't need it? Well, honestly, there's nothing that is until the game XDefiant releases. If you haven't heard of XDefiant yet, pretty much it's an exact replica of Call of Duty, but yet it has connection-based matchmaking. Now, I'm sure there still is a form of skill-based matchmaking in the game for the bottom 10 to 20% of players, but as I've said, and I'm sure most people can agree with me, that's perfectly fine. It's also confirmed that the game will have a ranked game mode, which I'm sure will have a form of skill-based matchmaking as well. But again, I'm sure we can all agree that's perfectly fine, as the top 10 to 20% of players can have fun playing that. So that means for the average players just playing within the casual game modes, there's no skill-based matchmaking at all. This is huge because XDefiant literally plays just like Call of Duty, from the maps to the gunplay to the movement to even the loadout system. XDefiant is pretty much a carbon copy of Call of Duty, but the major difference is it has connection-based matchmaking, not skill-based matchmaking. XDefiant has already had a few open betas, so people have already been able to play it, and they say it feels exactly like they're playing OG Call of Duty. Personally, I was lucky enough to have been able to play it within one of its open betas, and I could confidently say that that statement is true. This is bad news for Call of Duty because if XDefiant releases and it's a good release, then people might just start playing XDefiant over Call of Duty, simply because XDefiant is practically just like Call of Duty, but with connection-based matchmaking and not skill-based matchmaking. In conclusion, the death of Call of Duty will be skill-based matchmaking, as people have been fed up with it. The problem is people don't have another game like Call of Duty to go to until now. Once XDefiant releases and it starts to gain more and more traction, it could potentially finally be the game that kills Call of Duty, all because of one simple thing, that being skill-based matchmaking. While skill-based matchmaking is needed for at least the bottom 10 to 20% of players, or even within ranked for the top 10 to 20% of players, it is not needed for everyone else. The people that are considered the average players of the game do not need or want skill-based matchmaking in Call of Duty at all. But seeing as how the developers won't even acknowledge the existence of skill-based matchmaking, even though we all know it's in Call of Duty, I think that unfortunately it will end up killing Call of Duty unless they finally do acknowledge its existence and do something about it. For now, if you don't like skill-based matchmaking at all within Call of Duty, and you want a game that is just like Call of Duty but with connection-based matchmaking, then you'll want to try out XDefiant when it releases. I think XDefiant will be the new arcade first-person shooter game of people's choice until Call of Duty does something about skill-based matchmaking. Hopefully, if they finally do decide to do something about skill-based matchmaking, then it's not too late. That's it for me though. Do you think skill-based matchmaking will kill Call of Duty? If so, then why? And will you move on to a new game like XDefiant because of it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like. And if you want more content like this, then subscribe. Have a great day, everyone.